Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode, we're going to talk about the mindsets that form your frame. So the title is, what are the mindsets that form your frames? And it's a continuing conversation really with my friend and colleague and co-author, Kevin Eikenberry. So welcome back, Kevin. Good to have you back again.
Glad to be here again.
And so in our last episode, we talked about the importance of how you frame a problem. And this week, we're going to talk about the mindsets that you bring to forming that frame. So Kevin, I had a little brief conversation kind of figuring out where are we going to go with this. What are some of your thoughts in terms of what are the mindsets that form your frame, and what are maybe some of the different mindsets and why they matter, that kind of stuff?
And I got a long list. So let me just start with this. So because of the differences in our communication styles, sometimes when I'm having a conversation with my wife, she doesn't think it's a conversation. She thinks it's more like argument. So if I frame, so I'll just take that as the background, right?
Right.
If I'm going to go deal with somebody or some people on my team and I'm framing it as a conflict, it's going to lead to how I deal with it, coach them, etc. If I frame it as we need to have a conversation, then that may frame it differently. Now, I would argue that the latter is more effective than the former in that case. But either one is going to impact the way you go about it. So that frame or that mindset that you bring in is a part of that. So probably the most prevalent one that we as leaders need to deal with is a situation occurs. And where do you go first? Did someone screw up, or is there a process problem?
Really common one. And that shows up in coaching. It shows up in teams trying to solve some kind of business issue. It could be a coworker conflict. That could go a lot of different directions.
It goes everywhere. But the point is, if I, as a leader, or I as a team member for that matter, but if I frame it as it's a problem, why did Guy do that? Silly guy, right? And I start pointing my finger, or use other words, start pointing my finger at mentally blaming Guy, then that changes everything about how I've now framed the problem and how I think we would go about solving it. But if my starting point is, I wonder if there's a process problem here, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge piece. You often talk about assume benign intent. Right? Just assume that people weren't trying to mess you up, and they weren't maybe even trying to do it. You don't know. You just assume benign intent. I like to assume positive intent. Yeah. We can't always get ourselves there, but I can tell you this, the framework that you bring in, that person has negative intent, that person has positive intent, or that person has benign intent, has a huge impact on how you will frame the problem and how you will address the situation. And so the mindset on top of it is the starting point for all of the rest that flows.
Yeah, I think the phrase you used, or the word you used before we started, was the meta frame. It's not even this particular issue, how do you frame it? We're backing up even bigger and saying, what is my starting frame for how I figure out my frame? And I think that's huge. And I've had people ask at times, how does all this, pre-assumption and how you think about, is it people or process? How does this affect things, and why does it matter? And I'm thinking, I don't know neuroscience well enough or psychology well enough. I honestly don't know. Here's what I do know, that if I take the perspective that Kevin is the problem, I'm going to talk to Kevin in a different way. And maybe it's my word choice, maybe it's my tone, maybe it's my body language, maybe it's all of the above. He's going to know that I think he's the problem.
And all of that's true, 100%. And we may miss the real root cause.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is that there's a process problem, right?
Yep.
And Kevin's doing it in a way based on how he understands the process, or how he was taught the process, or whatever or he's an old version of the process.
Yep.
Whatever. Like, the fact is that all of what Guy said is right. Plus, we may never get to the real problem. That's the whole point of the framing, is we've got to look at it in a way that allows us to be successful in solving it. And if we look at it from the wrong angle, that's why it's so valuable to bring together the different parts of the organization. It is bring a marketing person and a salesperson and an accounting person and a manufacturing person. They all bring a different viewpoint. So if we get the same frame, then those different viewpoints focused into the same frame will all have great value.
I think the point you just made is so big that if we're not careful with how we frame it, we will completely miss the real source of the problem. And once we miss it, we're really going to have a hard time backing up and and solving it. We're solving the wrong problem, in effect.
Yeah.
So I'm interacting with a team member and I'm trying to fix them rather than fix the information flow that comes to them. Probably 50 different ways to talk about that. So we talked a bit about, so we're talking about this kind of meta frame idea. And what are some ways that people in leadership, and I'll say especially, let's think about a person who maybe hasn't had a lot of leadership experience. They've had a lot of individual contributor experience. And this maybe is a little bit of a new idea to them. How can they prepare themselves to have that bigger, broader, more inclusive and open meta frame that allows them to find the root cause rather than fixate on little details or just their perspective? What can they do to help move themselves in that direction?
Well, I think the first thing is just start thinking about everything, thinking about situations around you. Okay, is this a process problem or a people problem? Or if it were a process problem, how might I look at it differently than if I immediately blame someone? So in other words, you can do this in real time on things that are, you watch television, you watch the news, and you can say, what frame am I choosing to look at this through? I mean, without us being political, it's not hard to say that someone who votes Democratic and someone who votes Republican look at the same thing and see something differently. Now, and I'm not saying you should be one or the other. My point is that I believe as a leader and even as a highly functioning human, you should be able to see both of those points of reference, even if you only agree with one of the two. But you need to understand the other frame enough so that you can interact with people. I mean, I'm not even getting to influencing people, but as a leader, we would need to get to influencing people. But I'm just saying, I need to understand both of those perspectives. You know, you said before our other one, should we talk about the mask? Well, let's talk about the mask for a second, even though we said we weren't going to. So, so here's the thing.
It's a good example.
If you view the mask as a usurping your freedoms,
yes,
then you don't want to wear the mask. If you view the mask as it's kind to others, why wouldn't everyone wear a mask? Then you wear a mask. And I'm not saying which is right or not, but here's the other thing about frames is that sometimes both can be true. Let's go back to where we started.
Right, both can be true.
Are there process problems? You're upset with me. Did something go wrong? Yes. Could it partly be me? Yes. Could it also be partly process? For sure. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So one of the things that we need to do is get better at recognizing number one, there are multiple frames.
Step one.
And then number two, where is our typical starting point? Like I'm going to typically start with, even though sometimes, you know, in my heart and in my head, when I'm in this office remotely, I might get ticked off at someone on my team. But hopefully, before I do anything, I step back and say, okay, where's the process problem here?
Yeah.
Is it always process? No, it might be some of each. But I need to be thinking about which is it and where my starting point, my initial frame will be process. My initial frame will be opportunity, not problem. My initial frame will be people can get better as opposed to no, they're stuck, right? So doesn't mean they're the right frames. I happen to believe as a leader, they're the most helpful frames, but I need to recognize that both exist. I need to recognize where I start, and I need to recognize that they may coexist.
That's some powerful stuff. I'm going to leave it there because that was a really good summary of some critical points about, I think you touched on, in some respects, the complexity of being an effective leader and being willing to acknowledge all of these possible things could be true at the same time, and trying to find a way to frame it so that you're allowing for all the different frames, at least at the start. At the end of a conversation, you can decide to pick one over the other. All that stuff is true. How you start, though, is that meta frame and making allowance for that and realizing that we're probably going to see it different ways. And let's at least talk about it and recognize that some of both might be true. And maybe neither frame is the best frame. Maybe we got to take a little bit of one and a little bit of the other to make the frame we use. Could be true. And I think that's really powerful stuff to share with people that are moving into leadership. They're trying to learn how to talk like a leader. So what I'm going to suggest is this. If you can take what Kevin said, I'd say go back and listen to it again, because he just dumped a ton of wisdom on you in about 45 seconds. So I'd say go back and listen to it again. Really good perspectives there. And if you can figure out a way in your life, in your situation, to master and apply what Kevin said, you can talk like a leader.
This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.